first and foremost, as always, thank you so much for doing this.
I'm very happy to do it. Thanks.
It's 2026 now.
Yeah, can you believe that?
That came really
Oh my,
fast.
Yeah.
Talk about what's to come, what your priorities are for this year.
Well, as we do this interview, this January 6th, 2026 is a big day because it is 3 years to the day that I came back to City Hall as mayor on January 6th of 2023, and it's 3 years to the day before the end of this term. So it really does create a focus on what have we done and where are we going. And my way of trying to look at those things is to focus real hard. I mean, having a deadline really focuses the mind. And so, but focusing real hard on the here and now, but doing it in a way where we're looking about what is the long-term outcomes, what's the vision for the long term. And of course, we're starting the year with one of my highest priorities, and that is to focus on our budget, and focus on our budget in a way where we can meet the long-term needs of our city. I'm concerned about our budget, and I'm concerned about how we're going to achieve the goals of a growing, very successful city over time. So one of the things I'm doing is that I'm offering some reforms in the way we go about our budgeting process. And as you have reported, one of the reforms that I'm very determined about is making sure that we have, by way of ordinance, an efficiency audit process that's system-wide. It's throughout all of our city. My determination is that I want to make sure that we're providing effective and efficient government and those services that people want and need and demand from us. And we do it where we're also looking at continued improvement. How do we continue to improve ourselves as we go along? I also want to make sure we're doing it in a way where we're living within our means. And we make sure that by looking at how we're going about doing our business, constantly improving how we go about our business, that we're able to save money when we're doing that business. So I anticipate that we will pass an ordinance that will put into place an independent audit process. My hope is that we do that no later than mid-February. In addition to that, I've offered reforms, as you know, that relate to how council member offices spend money. I've already put that out as a proposal. We will take that up as early as next week at the Audit and Finance Committee, and my goal would be for us to pass that by the end of this month. Now, while that's my goal, I'm always careful to make sure that if we need to take the time, we're going to be thoughtful, and so I want to make sure we take the appropriate time, but get that in place pretty quickly. So one of my highest priorities is something we're going to be addressing right off the bat.
Kind of process the ordinance for me. What work is going on behind the scenes right now to figure out what will actually be in it?
Yeah, so really good question. And as of like today, for example, I've been looking at a potential code change. There's nothing in our code related to the audit process because it's something we've not done. Now we have there's code with regard to our independent auditor. The City of Austin has an auditor that's independent of the management functions of the city, and the auditor reports directly to the mayor and council. That process, I've spent time visiting with the auditor, I've spent time visiting with the manager and with a couple of council members. But now and I've told them what my thought process is on how we should go about doing it, what are strengths and weaknesses of different proposals that are out there, and what the goal ought to be from my point of view. We're now at the point where we need to put that into language that would fit into the code, which will require another provision in code. I've been working on that even today. That needs to be looked at by the manager, needs to be looked at by the auditor. And then my hope is, and I'm not committing to this, but my hope is that we can have that out as early as maybe Friday of this week so that we can bring it up and talk about it at the Audit and Finance Committee on the 14th. Then the next step would be that we would take that up on January 20th at a work session of the City Council. That's the first work session of 2026, and we would take that up at the work session and then maybe be able to bring it up at another work session. But by the first meeting of February, I would like to be in a position where we can pass that ordinance and get it into place. Again, if it requires a little more time to be thoughtful, and I'm keeping in mind also that council members need to have time to look at this. The manager needs to have an opportunity to bring his expertise to it, and of course the auditor needs to bring expertise to it.
Can you talk about how this will kind of parallel run with the Save Austin Now petition, how you all are working with them to bring them into the process?
Well, we need to have some more conversations. As you probably would guess, before I put out my idea on this, I visited with the folks that are leading up the Save Austin Now charter provision. We're going to need to see whether they get the signatures. As I have said, I believe doing it this way is a better method. A charter provision, which is what they're calling for, there's a couple of things that I think we need to look at on that. One is the charter is not meant to be a process-driven approach. It is a framework for how we govern. And so what happens is if you try to put a process in it, it makes it more difficult when something doesn't work and to be able to fix it. We can fix it by way of ordinance. Now, one of the advantages to a charter provision is that it's harder to do away with something if somebody decides, well, I just don't like having an independent audit process. I'm building into this a protection in that regard because I get that and I think that's a legitimate concern. And what we would do, and what I have said that I want to have in this code provision, is that it would require a supermajority of the council to say, we're doing away with something like an independent audit process. Another thing that I worry about is that I would like to get us going. And I think that this is so important that we ought to be moving as fast as we can, and that's why you hear me talking about it in the process I'm talking about. And that we can do by way of ordinance. A charter provision, if they get the signatures, that would require that we have an election in May, so we're at the middle of the year. And then it even has times in the provision, it has certain time frames in there. So I don't think we're going to get the kind of advantage as soon as I would like from having an audit process. So there are weaknesses to the charter provision process, and I'll visit more with them as we go along. I wanted to be further along before I have additional conversations. But this is something the city, we need to have an independent audit process that's transparent. I'm willing to lead in an aggressive and determined way on that. And so those of us, I mean, we can disagree about details, but we ought to be working together on the outcome.
I suspect that this year budget is going to feel like it's coming really quick, especially with where the city's at with its budget, what we heard during the budget process in 2025. We talked last year about some changes you all are making with the Audit and Finance Committee and trying to make that budget process more transparent. Anything this year people need to be watching out for?
Well, it's more of the same. Actually, I'll say that slightly differently. We're going to be doing more. I think the budget process last year really, again, I'll use the phrase, focused the mind. It showed a couple of things. One is what it showed is that the reliance on the past of outside money just can't be done. And the voters told us they want us to live within our means. And they helped define what that means. Well, with that going forward, with that focus, we ought to be able to do more in terms of being prepared. The other thing is that we ought to be better prepared going into this budget process with regard to how we ought to be reaching out to other jurisdictions. the city, because it can't be all things, but yet it gets a lot of the attention from different groups that want to have help. One of the big concerns is, well, there may be other organizations that can provide assistance and help, and by that I mean other jurisdictions, that we ought to be looking to. And then finally, I've had meetings, including sitting in this room with different groups, about how do I help you, whatever groups I'm visiting with, how do I help you in talking to you, the philanthropy community, the people that support you otherwise, because there won't be as much government money to meet some of your goals. How do I help you communicate that? So those are all sorts of kinds of things that you ought to expect. The other thing that I think you ought to expect is that, particularly as we look toward a potential bond election, is how that bond election, how the creation of debt, how the payment of debt, how all of that plays out with the past several bond elections, how it plays out in the moment that we're in with the budget constraints and money constraints that we're talking about, and how do we ask the right questions on what ought to be in that bond election, and importantly, why have a bond election?
So that will be, I assume, a focus for the city moving
Absolutely.
through the end of the year. Talk a little bit about, where you're at with that bond, what you think needs to be talked about in it.
Well, that's a real good question, and I'm not going to preordain that. But here's what I will say about that. That is what you ought to expect to see us do as early as, again, next week at the January 14th Audit and Finance Committee meeting. What I've asked for, you'll remember that last year, one of the things that I asked that the committee do is work with our professional finance staff to come up with what I always refer to as a decision tree. A decision tree where you're asking the big questions and the right questions that get you to an answer, should we have a TRE? That's what we did last year. This year, what I want us to do is come up with the big questions and the right questions about what should we be asking about what ought to go in that bond election. Whether it build, the kinds of questions along the lines of, does it build on something else that's already been done? Is it one-time money? You can make a major improvement in the city, it's one-time money, but it doesn't create ongoing expenses, things of that nature. In fact, I have a meeting today with the professional staff to start, not to, it's more than a start, it's the start of the finish, I hope, because we've already started figuring out what those questions are, and we'll bring that up at the Audit and Finance Committee meeting, because I think there's two big questions, two big areas of questions. One is, what do you ask that gets you to why have a bond election? And the second big question, or group of questions, is if you're going to have a bond election, what are we asking that helps us decide what goes into it? I don't want to prejudge, and we've got a bond advisory task force that bless their hearts, are working very hard, and I don't want to prejudge all of that, but I do want to provide the guidance and help to get us to the right result.
Finance aside, what are your other priorities for this year?
Well, there's a couple that first, I guess I start with, let's build on some of our successes. We're doing great work, speaking of bond elections, we're doing great work on infrastructure. We've got a lot of infrastructure work in place that we really need to have happen. We need to focus on it right now. We need to get it done. We need to get it done well, on time, on budget, because it's going to be something we need for the long term and the vision that we have for our city. But we need to stay after that, and we need to not be distracted from it. Things like the Austin Infrastructure Academy, which we created so that we would make sure we had the workforce to be able to carry out this much infrastructure, this many infrastructure projects. We need to continue to build on the success of that. In addition, we need to be focused on economic development. I mean, we've been talking about budget, And one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we increase the revenue to the city? Well, a key factor to that is going to be economic development. And that means we need to have a stronger focus out of this building on how we do economic development. It's been a priority, but I think it's time to really put that on steroids, if you will. And I think part of that is the lesson of last year's budget process. So you'll see more of things like what we just announced with Southwest Airlines. That's a huge economic development opportunity, and that's now going to come to fruition. So you'll see that as a priority and more focus, because I think that will also help us fund the basic services that people want and need. Another thing is that Austin, along those lines, is Austin really is an international city now. And as a result of being an international city, we need to mature into that role. It will mean a lot in terms of economic development, international investment in Austin, and there's a lot of pent-up desire for international investment in Austin. And I don't mean just investment in real estate or real estate developments. I mean investment. I was talking to somebody the other day that was talking to me about the value of having international investment in funding of some of our entrepreneur, creative economy, and technology, funding those programs as they go along. So you'll see, I think, an additional focus on that as well. And then, you know, I really feel strongly that we have done great work in the past 3 years on my putting affordability first agenda, but we can't stop on that. Affordability and making sure that Austin is more affordable and stays more affordable will continue to be a first priority of mine, and something that's always out in front. That also means improving on things that we've done that now we are going to have a little bit of experience with, and we watch and say, oh, that didn't, it's okay to say that didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, or we thought it was going to, and improving on it, and listening to unintended consequences. You'll recall that when we did a lot of this agenda, particularly with regard to land use reforms, I asked for and we put into those changes a monitoring system. And the first report is out. It's pretty good, but we need to continue to monitor. And then the final part about that with regard to affordability first and putting it first is that we made real strides when it came to cutting red tape, regulatory red tape, and slowing things down. But just today I had somebody come up to me and tell me of an instance where they felt like something had been slowed down because we still have work to do in that regard. The good news is we have a new director of Austin Development Services. He is a very creative mind and really dedicated to this, but we're still on that horse. We still need to be pushing.
Anything else you want to say? Want people to know?
The focus, we tend to make people tend to make some New Year's resolutions. I'm not a real big New Year's resolution kind of guy, but we're going to see a lot of movement here in this first year of what I consider to be a 3-year increment of time. We can't do that just in the context of City Hall. We have to do that in the context of the state and the federal government. There's been so much change in the past year, particularly with regard to how the federal government approaches things. So one of my priorities this year is to make sure that Project Connect and our light rail program is moving forward in a way that the voters mandated we do it. One of the key parts of that is, of course, working with the federal government. And we've had great meetings in the past year with the federal government. But we'll continue to focus on that, keeping in mind the changes the federal government makes in the way it awards money, and not just Project Connect, but other programs. The state government, of course, puts limits on what we can do with regard to budgeting and revenue, and talks of putting even more limits. I really worry about that because the short-term focus that some of those limitations put on us will keep us from being able to pay for the things that successful cities need as we grow and as we have additional needs. And that leads to the second thing, which is we've had such a great focus on public safety. And I'm really pleased with where we are with regard to public safety. We have a police contract that's a 5-year police contract. We have a firefighters contract. We've passed legislation that improves and fixes problems that we had with our pension system for our firefighters. We have a contract with our professionals at EMS. But in our general fund, we know that 100% of our property taxes go to police, fire, EMS, and a small amount to forensics, which used to be part of our police department. We know that about 70% of our sales tax revenue goes to police, fire, EMS, and forensics. So a huge part of our general fund budget goes to those very important parts. But as we have greater needs over time, the long-term vision, as we have greater needs, how are we going to pay for increases that we may need in those very important areas? So that's one of the things that, of course, we'll also be talking with the state. Not in 26, hopefully, but as we get prepared for our 2027 legislative session.
Thank you, as always, for doing this. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing it.